Welcome to Interstage Left. I'm your host, Yvette Monique Clark. This is the spot where we kick it about all things theater, from on stage to backstage and even under the stage. We're talking stories, craft, and the passion that keeps the theater world alive. Let's get into it. Hello. So today, we have Dan Pardo, the man of many tricks. Hi.
Hi, Yvette. I wasn't sure whether talking to your audience or talking to me.
I was like talking to you. Thank you so much, first of all, for agreeing to do this with me.
Of course.
I started this podcast for several reasons. I always say this in the beginning, that it's fascinating to me that we all come from different places, different starts, different experiences, and we all end up on the same stage. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I like to do is find out where you're from, and how you got started in this business. If you had any inspirations, any mentors, how did you get to the place where you knew you wanted to do something in this business?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of it has to do with where I came with where I came from. So I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is a small city, about maybe an hour and a half northwest of Philly. And I went to a very small school, public school, but my graduating class was like 63 people. So from, even well before I got into high school, there was a recognition from my parents and the community that there was no high school theater program, which is how a lot of people get into theater. So I was doing community theater since the age of 6. It started out on stage in little ensemble chorus parts. Then I was doing some children's theater, also on stage. And then, excuse me, when I was about 10 years old, I had already been playing piano for 6 years at this point. I started very young with a deep curiosity and a fervor for what I do now, but I didn't know that music direction even existed as a career path. So I was just doing community theater on stage, and there's a long story which we won't get into, but needless to say, I ended up playing piano for a children's production of Snow White when I was 10.
Wow.
And it kind of set me on this journey that I wasn't even aware of. I was just kind of like going with the current of, how I could be useful in this space. So I continued with a few stage roles, but I started, doing more and more stuff in the pit. And by the time I was through high school, I was music directing several shows a year at this small community theater in my town called Genesius. Okay. And Genesius Theater was co-founded in 1971 by a gentleman named Michael O'Flaherty, who recently retired as the resident music director for the Goodspeed Opera House in Connecticut, where Annie and Man of La Mancha and a whole bunch of other shows either were developed or went to Broadway, or even without that developmental space, it continues to be a home for the American musical theater. So I went and interned with him when I was still, I guess it was the freshman, like the summer after freshman year of college, because he went back to the theater that he started for a 35th anniversary kind of gala fundraiser. And he did a couple numbers, but the rest of the show I played. And he's like, who's this kid, who's taken over my theater? And so I went and interned with him. And at this point, I was set on a path to be like a high school choir director, because that's, my mentors up until that point were, my choir directors at school. I thought, I look up to them. They allow me these opportunities to do arrangements for ensembles and have leadership roles within the choirs at school. And that's kind of where I saw myself. And even with this opportunity at Goodspeed, I still didn't connect the dots, because I had this amazing summer, and I met all these amazing people like John McDaniel, who was the band leader at the Rosie O'Donnell Show, who won a Grammy for his work music directing the Annie Get Your Gun revival with Bernadette Peters. and Paul Williams, who wrote the Rainbow Connection and did all the music for, the Carpenters, like all these incredible folks. And I'm here like, all right, well, that was fun. Let's go back to being a high school choir director. So after 4 years, I got my degree, and I got a call back from the theater and said, hey, we really liked having you here for that summer. We're looking to have, a full-time music assistant for our upcoming season. Would you consider putting off teaching a year? And I said, yeah, I really would. And that kind of, 1 year became 3 years, became a move to New York City, and now I've been here for 11. So that's how it started, Yvette.
Okay, that's the journey. So you are what we call you're a multifaceted musician, and you have several things. So since you took me down the path of music director, let's stay there for a second.
Sure.
So you told me how you got started. Your earliest influences. Okay. How do you define the role of a musical director to people outside of theater who don't know what music directing is? What does that mean?
Well, on a certain level, it's just kind of teaching the notes and rhythms, like in line with what I would do as a choir director or some other teacher. But really, for a revival, it's honoring the composer's intent, vocally and instrumentally. It is working as a collaborator with the director and the choreographer to create an artistic vision as far as all the musical responsibilities. It's elucidating to the actors what the music is telling them. How can I strengthen your acting by giving you clues as far as what the composition is implying? If there's a rest of the downbeat, is it a moment of discovery? Is it a moment of hesitation? If a melody is used in a melancholy way, what does that say about this moment that's different than when the melody was introduced in the context of the song? It's being responsible for all musical aspects of the score, and being the point person in the chain of command for all creative design and actor needs as far as the production is concerned.
Yeah. Okay. So when you first get a score, what are you listening for? Like, what do you hear? Did you feel first before you teach? Do you like, I've talked to directors, so music directors, music is different in a sense.
Yeah,
so what are you listening for when you open the score? You're like, okay, I know I'm going to teach.
I think it depends on the show. Sometimes I'm doing a reading in the city, and I'm given a piece of paper, and it's like, go, and there's no context whatsoever. And sometimes we'll have a meeting beforehand so I can get a sense of what the style is, what the influences are, what time period, if the music is reflective of the time period, or is it kind of superimposing some kind of musical genre on top of something and trying to make sense out of it. There's nothing 18th century French about Les Mis, but there are certain there's certain classical aesthetics that are placed on top of a pop score that kind of reconcile the differences. So if I'm doing a revival of a show, I'll try and listen to every cast recording that has been released at least once. So I see, are there performance practices that are consistent among all the recordings and all the performances? Is there something that I prefer? Is there something that I wish it were? So I kind of listen to something and have my own expectations based on what I know about the genre and the my own sensibilities and taste. Are there opportunities for freedom if it's a pop score? Is there a lot of leeway as far as riffing and kind of interpretation of the melody, or is everyone singing it the same way because that's kind of how it's done? So I will do a bit of listening, hopefully not to put people in boxes or set limitations for what they can and can't do, but just to kind of establish some rough parameters and get myself familiar with the score orally. And there are a lot of opportunities if I'm on a bike ride, if I'm on the subway, if I'm taking a walk. That's all good times to take in the score. And then there's the moment behind the piano for me, where I get it in my fingers, and I really like something like Marie's, where we work, just because I'm the band. When in rehearsals the same way. You don't get
Right.
a band when you're setting something, but you have to be the band. So how can I embody the score for myself just as a pianist, and that kind of gets me a step closer to conducting, which is like how I feel all the different moving pieces as far as the orchestration is concerned. And the vast majority of the shows that I've conducted, I've done so behind the piano. It really is only had to succeed when I was in Seattle, where we had conducting like a podium chair with the baton, and then my Broadway chair when I subbed in to conduct rather than playing second keyboard. I did a little bit of stick conducting as well.
Okay. What show was that for?
That was for Amazing Grace at the Nederlander.
Okay.
Which was something. Great cast. And it was a really fun pit dynamic too. I learned a lot, and I had a great time.
Okay. So music directors are responsible for shaping the actor and how they put the music forward. So how do you teach that without stepping on like the actor's choices, or do you collaborate with the choices between how you think it should go and how they think it should go? Like, how does that work for you?
Well, I'll give you a good example. I was doing a production of Company in Barrington. And do you know the actor Larry Street?
No, I don't.
Okay. He's a wonderful African-American performer who is recently on the tour of Mean Girls playing the principal. And, he's playing the role of Harry opposite Jeanette Bayardelle. And, it's the duo that is not traditionally in other major castings, cast to be African-American performers.
Right.
And so, he's singing this song, Sorry Grateful, which is, very in line with the musical stylings of the 1970s. But he, as a Black man, have certain aesthetics and performance practices inherent to him as a human being that are different to, say, if I were to sing that same song at that same time in history. Right. So we had an interesting discussion where, on one hand, Sondheim is very specific with his music. On the other hand, I don't want to deny someone his humanity for having an instinct for a song. So right. It was kind of like, here are the notes. Oh, that was, that's different than what Sondheim intended. We had a brief chat, and I'm like, all right, why don't you try it as you, and we kind of centered on a really tasteful but stylistically authentic interpretation of that song moment for him as the performer that he is. And I thought that was a really beautiful example of how a collaboration can work between a performer who has not only a point of view, but as an identity. What right. service would we be doing our audience or our cast if we check a box in terms of diversity and then make them sing, the way that everyone else has heard on a cast recording, right. when the song is very specific to a time and place that had people like Larry living and breathing and singing in that time. So that's one that always comes to mind for me. Other times, there's a little less push and pull because frankly, maybe the actors don't have as strong of a motivation or a reason for doing what they're doing, or right. It's just a wrong note, or whatever the case may be, but I think that was a really prime example of what that collaboration can be like. And I've tried to approach similar situations since that point in 2017 with a sensitivity and respect, because, while, we all have our own kind of training and expertise, actors go through a lot of preparation in their own right, and I have to respect their process.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer. How do you? The script is raw. You have a new cast.
Hmm.
How do you build like the harmonies and figure out who should be where and the arrangements? Because sometimes things have to change because of the bodies that you have. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Like ideally, I in the casting room, I rarely the music director is usually the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to director and choreographer. I like to say we have veto power. So if there's someone that we can't work with, it's like there's just not a voice there.
Yeah.
So I have veto power, but it's rare that I'm like, oh, I really like that person, vocally, if they don't have the goods as far as acting, or they can't cover a different role, it usually, unfortunately, is that order of operations. So with that said, hopefully in the audition room, the casting director and the music director are kind of keeping tabs on who do we have? Do we have 6 tenors and 0 basses? If so, that's a problem. So we like to kind of be ahead of it a little bit. And then so long as we do that, when we get into the room, we can self-select a little bit, who's the most comfortable on top? Okay, that's me. Great. You'll take top tenor, you'll take soprano 2, who is the low alto notes? Yvette, great. So, so part of it is just kind of being proactive in that. Other times, you might have, a vision as far as like, here's an example. When I was music directing a middle school production of 1776, that was we did a gender swap because this was years before the Roundabout revival, like 5 years before, 4 years before. Any middle school drama program is like 90% women and 10% guys.
Yeah.
So you have a problem because 1776 is 27 men and 2 women,
Right.
because it's all the congressmen and so we did a gender swap. The only 2 men in the cast were Abigail Adams and Martha Jefferson. Everyone else, with I think maybe the Courier also, we had a couple other ones, but by and large, it was a gender swapped cast. So there were a lot of score implications. I had to change some keys. I had to, invert some chords. I had to simplify the harmonies, not only for the gender breakdown, but also because they were middle schoolers. So that's an extreme example. But, in most cases, the text of the score dictates the needs. And if you can't meet the needs, you just have to do the best you can and fill out the chords. The same thing happens a lot more often, actually, in terms of the orchestration. It's set for 16 or for 22, and you're at a regional theater. It's like, well, we can afford 7. So you combine books, you simplify things. The piano does more heavy lifting. So rather than an orchestral texture where it's like, sometimes you'll hear like a honky-tonk moment of like exposed piano. So rather than it being a color, it's being more of a function of filling in the chords in a way that, perhaps a string section would do if you had the full orchestration. Right. So, you have to, unfortunately, make some sacrifices and use your judgment and skills to give the audience the best experience that you can, given your resources.
Yes. How do you... Because the room is a collaboration most of the time. Sometimes there's no real democracy. We've been there.
Oh, I definitely have.
How do you have a collaborative space with the director, the choreographer, and without losing, you having to lose the vision that you have for the musical part of it?
Yeah. Sometimes more successful than others. I was in a production a couple of years ago where I remember I was going home every day and Chrissy's asking, how'd rehearsal go? I'm like, oh, great. And then she saw the show. It's like, are you sure? Because you've been telling me it's been great. And that was not great. And because, that for that particular production, I was really proud of the work that I was doing on the score. Artistically, even from the casting, it was a very kind of unconventional vision that, hasn't been the default for that particular show, and probably won't become the default in the future. But I was brought on after the director, who has a certain point of view, and I was supportive of that point of view, and bring it to realization. So that collaboration was successful. And as far as how the score was performed, I was proud of that aspect of the production. So other times, and that was the first time that particular director and I had worked together.
Mm.
So I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted to be supportive of that vision. Sometimes if it's someone who I've worked with before, or someone who I don't necessarily, I don't know if I need to impress them, whatever. It's
Right.
If I feel a little bit more like we have a shared vision that I
Right.
can fight for, like, oh, we're trying to reach the same goal here. I think we can do this more successfully if we do such and such.
Right.
Then I'll be a little bit more firm in terms of asserting myself and my taste and my sensibility. Or I really think that Lerner and Lowe knew what they were doing here, for this
Mm-hmm.
particular reason, or this musical choice says something about this moment in the story and this character. And I need to be the advocate, especially when I'm doing a revival and the composer is long dead. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because no one else is going to speak up for the score.
Right.
So uh, and I guess it's similar to maybe a dramaturg in the context of talking with the director. But I'd like to say that the music director needs to be the most agreeable of the
Mm.
three, because a director or choreographer can be a little domineering, or a little quirky, or a little whatever. Opening night comes and goes, and they go away. The
That's right.
conductor stays the entire run of the show.
That's
So
right.
I have to have a good relationship with the cast. I have
Yeah.
to have a good relationship with the crew and the stage management. I have to be trusted for people to go to me with their problems. And if I'm, so the actors need to know that I'm there for them. And in the
Mm-hmm.
rehearsal room, if they don't feel supported by me, or if we have, we usually teach the music first, just because it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make sense to put something on its feet if you don't know the song. So
Right.
by the time direct, aside initial meetings and table work, by the time a song gets on its feet, the actor and I have already worked through it, and we have a relationship. Now they're on their feet, and they're getting marching orders from the director that's contrary to what the two of us have already discussed. If I don't step in and say, whoa, we've kind of gone through this, and what we were thinking was X.
Mm-hmm.
If I just kind of leave them there to get um, a lashing, or talked down to, or confused because
Mm-hmm.
the director is saying something that doesn't jive with what we had already discussed, how am I going to build trust with that actor for the duration, not only of the rehearsal process, but the whole run? So
Yeah.
I really think it's important for the actors and I, and the musicians and everyone else, to feel like they can trust me.
Right.
um, and sometimes that requires me stepping in for them when the director or the choreographer is concerned.
Yeah.
And other times, we've, the choreographer and I, I mean, hopefully we all have, have a great collaboration throughout. But just in terms of my own role, I really have to keep that in the back of my mind, because I want to be collaborative with these other directors. But at some point, they're going to go away, and I'm going to need to lead the group with strong morale.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, is there a genre you feel most at home in? Is there are you a classical guy, contemporary guy?
Uh,
And yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of kind of varied interests, which is why I like musical theater in general. Um, and from my sets at Marie's, I kind of have a lot of joy in a lot of different shows, old and new. I would say the things that I are a little beyond my, not my reach, but I feel like I need to really work at, are the heavy lift, the Adam Gettles, the Sondheims,
Mm.
I can really feel at home in a classic golden age musical as well as a pop score. Sometimes, for who I am, I'm not always the most logical choice when it comes to music directing certain, scores, just because of different communities involved
Mm-hmm.
with who brings that music, especially pop music, to life. But I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it, and I feel like I can do my very best when it comes to performing authentically in different styles. So I like to be in the mix for pop shows of all stripes. Um, but there is something really uh, fulfilling of approaching a challenging score and doing it well. I think one of a somewhat not forgotten, but something that doesn't get a lot of play is The Most Happy Fella, which is a Frank Lesser score. And
Mm-hmm.
half of it feels like songs that are left over from Guys and Dolls, but the other half are like these very operatic, songs that are, pieces of music that are, inspired by like Italian opera, because
Oh.
um, the character Tony is Italian and has a way of expressing himself that is very operatic. Even how it was constructed, it was originally a three act show, which tells
Mm.
you in terms of its structure. We're thinking opera, we're thinking high art, and I didn't music direct it, but I assisted on the production at Goodspeed and was very proud of it. And I loved playing that score, and it's become a favorite of
Mm-hmm.
mine. So I would say. Uh, I enjoy the challenge of, um, let me say it this way. I've very, very rarely gone into a show where I don't like the show more at the end of it than I did at the beginning.
Okay.
So there are certain things like um, I was walking down past New World Stages yesterday, and I saw a buddy of mine who's in the pit of Heathers, and like to me, like that kind of millennial kind of pop, girl centric show isn't necessarily my wheelhouse, although I do love Legally Blonde. I really love that show. But like a lot of the Mean Girls, Heathers kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
doesn't resonate with me, or at least
Mm-hmm.
hasn't up until this point. Maybe if I work on a show, I'll get a newfound appreciation for it.
Right.
Um, and the same thing with some of these uh, shows that are conceived orchestrally, because I'm such a pianist first.
Right.
There is no easy way to play The Light in the Piazza on the piano, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore I've never, despite how gorgeous it is, and
Mm-hmm.
how uh, you know exciting of a piece of theater it is as a viewer, as someone who feels most at home behind the keyboard, it hasn't drawn me in the way that other ones where I can really kind of feel the score in my hands. So
Right. 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 Oh, absolutely. So I want to move into this copyist. I've never heard this term before, right? So when you sent me your resume, I looked
yes.
it up.
Oh, okay.
And then I was like, okay, so I know what you do, just never knew the term for it, right? And a lot of people don't know what a copyist is.
Yeah.
And from what I've been looking into, it's a hell of a skill to have.
Mm.
So for the people who never heard the term before, can you tell us what a music copyist is?
Yes. So a copyist is the person who's responsible for creating the actual physical scores that you look at and read. And sometimes it comes in tandem with a transcriptionist, which is taking a song that only has a demo, and I listen to it. I'm headphones on, you know, listening bar by bar, and I'm literally writing it out.
Wow.
Sometimes, so that's kind of a transcription slash copyist, making sure that the music is clean and accurate and
Right.
has page turns that are, don't leave a trombone player in the middle of a slide when he needs to, So, it's more of a utilitarian skill,
Right.
making sure things are clean and logical and error free. Um,
Right.
a transcriptionist is kind of somewhere in the middle, that where I've been given a piece of music that has a auditory medium that needs to be written out. So sometimes it's literal, I hear this, I write it down. Sometimes it's like, well, I hear that, but let's standardize this groove a little bit. Or there's, the person who was, the songwriter may not have, the pianist chops that I have. So let me embellish a little bit. And then it kind of gets into arranging territory. But so many of the shows that I've worked on, especially through the work of this gentleman, Eli Bolin, who's been a friend and collaborator now for 19 years, I think. It's this really beautiful relationship where he sends me his songs. I arrange them. I make the scores nice and pretty. We go and do a production, and then I become the music director because no one knows the score better than I do after painstakingly, so one of the reasons why I loved working as a copyist and transcriptionist, especially early in my career, was because it built relationships with composers. People who, if I sense someone is going somewhere, I want them to take me on the ride. So it's been a good way of getting in with different shows on the ground level, and building relationships with new and emerging artists in the community.
Okay.
And sometimes, for a revival, for example, so you've been to one of those shows where you get a score and it's that crappy handwritten thing from 1962 or whatever, and you can't read it. So a copyist is also just taking that old handwritten score, sprucing it up, making it pretty for everyone involved. So when they relicense the show or when this revival comes out, they don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah. Some shows are still that way. They don't change it. I think it's for the aesthetic or the history of the show. They just leave it that way.
Well, that's a generous assumption.
I've done a couple of those.
Sometimes it's about the money.
Also that.
Although I will say, sorry, I have so many tangents. Although I will say, certain scores, if I learn them on that old handwritten thing, I have the hardest time reading even like a new, cleaner version. I don't want a typeset whiz. I want that old whiz, with the slashes.
That's one of the shows I was talking about.
I want to read off the Chicago that I learned in 2003 at Reading High School.
That's right.
I don't want to read any other thing.
That's right.
Anyway, that's
right. Some of them stay that way, and I've been in both of those shows, and I'm like, what is this? We just touched on that. Like, what's the difference between a good and a good chart and a great chart? And we just went through that.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes, like, if a chart is, sometimes the specificity and the cleanliness of the chart is really great. Other time, if the style allows for freedom, I want the slashes.
Yeah.
Sometimes the chart just gives the framework for the musicians to be musicians.
Yeah. What are some of the mistakes that composers or arrangers make in their scores that you have to like clean up and be like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Sometimes it has to do with continuity. Like if a bar was cut in rehearsal, but like the score was being prepared, simultaneously, you'll get to the read down and half the parts, or the orchestra parts will be skipping a bar or adding a bar, and the conductor, who's kind of been, the most up to date with the rehearsal, is like, oh, wasn't this changed? Wasn't this fixed? Same thing happens with transpositions. If a song was transposed, or if the instrument was transposed. Say you're doing a reed part, and the doubler goes from a flute to a clarinet, then to an alto sax. And my job is to make sure that every time those switches take place, the appropriate transpositions take place, so they're not playing in a different key based on the instrument that they're choosing. So, those are some common examples. Other times, something's out of range, like maybe a bass part was written, but then the song was transposed, so now they don't have that low D because they're playing an upright and it doesn't have a C extension. So now they're playing a part. It's like, well, my instrument doesn't play that note, so you want to transpose it up an octave or revoice the chord? I don't know, but like So,
Oh,
you know, errors
this is
happen and you fix them. Sometimes big,
yeah.
sometimes small. And a lot of times the players will like they won't even bother you in the process. They'll just fix it and write it in their parts. And then the copyist's job is to collect the parts at the end of the production and implement all those we called stand fixes,
Okay.
into the score. So the next time the show is performed, we don't have to go through that same thing
The whole
again.
thing again.
All
Yeah.
those changes will be in the ink, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is fascinating to me because I can't read and I do it by ear, and
Mhm.
it's the people that can do this stuff is like it's so fascinating to me. So so that we talked about that too. How do you make a messy or incomplete score something that the performers can actually use?
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
it comes down to efficiency.
Yeah.
If we're taking 10 minutes of rehearsal to, A, figure out why it sounds like garbage, B, identify the problem, C, ask if everyone has pencils, and D, like try and make that's just time wasted, money wasted. Have
Yeah.
a clean chart and rehearsal will go smoothly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes folks don't know unless you have a composer or an arranger on your team. When they
Hmm.
bring the score to rehearsal, nobody knows what's wrong with it until the music director says, "I'm sorry, what?" So then that's when the pencils come out. We're all like,
Yeah.
"So we're not singing that and we're not doing that." Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and like sometimes things aren't necessarily wrong, but they're
Right.
vague. Like if you
Right.
take a look at Pippin, for example, if you look at the piano conductor score for a lot of the vocals, you'll have one staff with like three notes. All right, so who's singing those three notes? Is it a three-part men and women split in two octaves?
Right.
Is like some of them are the tenors and the altos singing the same thing in the same register, and then the baritones are singing the soprano part the octave down. I don't know. Someone has to make a choice at some time, but so it's just vague. That's
Wow.
the basic harmonies. Those are the notes that I need. Do something
Hmm.
with it. So a good music director will take a look at that in advance and have a roadmap. So when they get into rehearsals, we don't have to sit and be like, how do we do? What are we going to do here? We'll have a plan.
You need a plan.
You need a
Um,
plan.
so you prepare when you do the music, you've done full orchestra. You prepare music for full orchestras. Have you done that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like for example, one like strict copyist job I had was my friend Oran, who's an orchestrator, was creating an orchestration for a ballet in Russia, and
Ooh,
he didn't this was an immense amount of music, like thousands and thousands of bars of music for like 20 some odd pieces. He doesn't have time to go through every single part, every single page, and make sure that the music is pretty. So he just sent me the he kind of wrote the music in what's called kind of score view, which kind of makes page turns irrelevant. Just kind of like imagine one continuous scroll
oh,
of
okay.
music. And then he
Right.
sent me the files, and then it's my responsibility to make all the charts. So that was like a very strict and it's the interesting thing is I don't really need to know what the music sounds like, you know,
Oh, oh, okay.
so I was for that project, I literally listened to all season one of Serial, that podcast, because it's just a mindless visual task of making sure everything is clean, making sure they have a
Right.
page turn. All right, next part.
Right. Right. Wow. Okay. That's whew. Um, what's the most complicated show you've had to work on as a copyist?
As a copyist,
Hmm.
um, I
If
don't
there's
know.
one for you.
Maybe sometimes it's complicated just because the chain of command and like who you're dealing with. Like, I was doing a copyist job for a UK. It was like a West End production of Annie
Hmm.
Get Your Gun, that my friend Dan DeLang did the orchestrations for, and so you know I I was using a program called Finale, which up until last year was like the industry standard for Broadway and American theater. And over in the UK, they use a program called Sibelius. So anytime I was like communicating with them, we had to like export the file to a third kind of party extension so they could import it from that. Like there was a whole, just complicated, messy way of talking to each other,
Right.
not to mention time zone shifts and stuff. So that was complicated just because of some of the practical, facts on the ground. But
Right.
ordinarily, or sometimes the challenge is just the time frame. This past summer, I was the arranger for a production of a new show called True Crime Frankenstein that was being
Okay.
that is now licensed through Concord, and just the materials was given to me at a kind of a later date than I thought, and the scope of I thought it was going to be like one of these hour and a half one acts, and it turned out to be very much a full length musical. And so the challenge was just getting the parts done in that time crunch, and
Right.
many late hours and no sleep, and
Right.
so the challenges vary, whether it's time or the amount of instruments, or sometimes you'll have a specialty instrument like harp. I don't have a lot of insight when it comes to the notations that are required as a harp player. So
Right.
like I'm hoping that this is right, or and then I'll be like, oh well, actually, and given some kind of technical answer that it won't make
Right.
sense to anybody. So I'll learn because there's some instrument specific things that
Right.
I just don't know, and that the composer or the arranger didn't quite know because the specialty instrument that they wanted wasn't really in their wheelhouse.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. That's this is so good. This is so good.
Are you bored yet, everybody?
Nope, I'm not. It's my podcast, so I don't care. I'm not.
Thanks for
What was the fastest you had to like turn around a project? Like somebody said, Dan, we're dying over here. We need
oh man. I mean, there's some things that like I've just dropped everything, and then like the next 3 days I've just because when certain people call, you want to answer the phone.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things where I feel like I have too many things on my plate, and then it's a relief to kind of get something off of it. And then there are other times where I feel like there's too many things on my plate, and then somebody calls, and all of a sudden I find the time because I need to, because you want to make something happen.
Yes.
So like a 24-hour turnaround or something, or like I work an all-nighter, and then just kind of cancel a bunch, sub out a bunch of things and just crash for a day.
Yeah.
It's not how I like to work. And
Nobody
as you can
likes it.
tell from my present voice, it's probably because I was burning the candle on both ends.
Yes, at both ends. Yes. Your body will tell you when it's time to sit down.
Tell you, and the older I get, it's telling me faster and more frequently and for a longer period of time.
And it's very efficient. The message is very efficient, right? There's no mistaking what's happening to you. Have you ever had to translate a composer's vision because it wasn't clearly written? Like they gave it to you, and you're like, I don't even know what this is supposed to be. So,
No, actually, our mutual friend Franca, one of her friends is like a amateur songwriter, and she wanted to have some songs transcribed. And so I think I've done maybe three of songs for her so far. And her process is literally just singing into her iPhone on voice memo, and I transcribe the melody and then kind of have to imply a harmony based on the melody. So, all I'm getting is the single melody line. And from that, I'm creating, I know basically her project is like based off of the Princess Theaters in like the early 19 teens. So there's kind of, it's like, all right, these are roughly songs that are akin to Jerome Kern. So I know that style, and I know, what a typical arrangement or accompaniment would sound like. But in the case of the last song that the two of us collaborated on, I just had a completely ass backwards harmonization of what was in my head, that made the song, at least for the first like 12 bars, in a completely different key than what she had intended. And then, but she didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to explain what was wrong. And she's like, something just doesn't sound right. And and then so I was like, well, is it this? Is it that? Is it this? And then eventually I'm like, whoa, wait. Like this entire time, I thought this melody was like harmonized on the 4 chord, but like we're in a completely different key. This is a completely different, and same melody, same notes, but like we figured it out, and it was like there was such a disconnect in terms of where our brain, and it was interesting because we had like no way of knowing, but we figured it out. And sometimes it just takes a little time. There's a really famous, well, I don't know how famous it is, but if you look at the John Bacchino songbook, John Bacchino famously is a composer who is a very beautiful pianist, but much like Tom Harvey Schmidt, who wrote the Fantastics, didn't read music himself. So there is a very long introduction and kind of acknowledgement to John Bacchino's arranger at the top of his songbook, saying, thank you, I forget the person's name, to this person who sat with me bar by bar to make sure that what I was doing was being notated accurately and in the spirit of my songwriting, because this is something that I don't do, and it can be challenging to bring my music to fruition.
Yeah.
And I've been given kind of very gracious and similar acknowledgments from some of the songwriters who I've worked with when bringing their stuff to life.
Okay. One of the things that another thing that made me do this podcast was to talk to performers about how AI is affecting their lives. And so with this with the copyist, is that digital era that's moving in over us like possibly a cloud? Is that affecting that part of our business?
Well, so far the thing that's affecting the business most is the fact that last year Finale kind of announced that they were no longer going to be creating new updates, and a new software system called Dorico has moved in. And I've just been so overwhelmed with things that I haven't taken the time to learn how to use it yet. So I'm at so that's, I can't blame AI for that. That's my own, the industry shifting. And part of it has to do with the fact that, the music industry is changing a little bit, and, copyist work is essentially a graphic notation software, but this new Dorico kind of combines it, so it's kind of Logic and Finale in one, and you can kind of create a score and then play it back with real samples and change things, so it's a more kind of holistic program and software. There are some AI tools. One thing that I actually kind of have liked, and a lot of times someone will ask me to create a track for somebody, or they want a specific arrangement, and it's like, I want this version but without the vocals. There's an amazing open source AI tool called Vocal Remover now, and half the time I'm just like, I don't have the time for this, and you don't want to pay me, so just let's use this. It gets rid of the vocals like 95%. You'll be happy, I'll be happy, done.
Right. Move this along.
But like, I have seen kind of like people who create demos, and it kind of like, you put in the chord changes and it kind of in the style, and it kind of creates an AI accompaniment or something that I'm a little bit more leery on. But you can even say that, sampled instruments, when I'm creating my own demos, I'm not hiring, a full string section, or hiring a mallet percussionist player. I'm using my keyboard to kind of create it with sampled sounds. So, that's kind of been a form of AI, or at least kind of music technology, a bigger umbrella. replacing the needs of live musicians. There was that whole controversy with Here Lies Love a couple years ago,
Yeah.
where they kind of created a score that was kind of intentionally supposed to be very disco and slick and kind of, it had a certain aesthetic, but, it's like, do we really need to pre-record everything, or can
Right.
the players just kind of play in this style that kind of gives the illusion that it's not the earthy acoustic, experience that the show is claiming that it needs, or
Right.
the opposite of what it needs. So I think, like a lot of other fields, AI and technology are tools that are helpful, that are also where efficiency stops and artistry ends is kind of did I say that right? But what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I got what you're trying to say.
At some point, a human touch really is a
Yes.
valuable component that can't be replaced by anything.
Yes. I really
Even
feel
with
that.
one of the challenges I mentioned earlier, that I've been working with this middle school for the past 10 years doing their spring show. And, in the last couple of years, these licensing companies have really been pushing junior versions, which are great because it simplifies things, it cuts things, it makes it more accessible to the students, which makes, my job easier in many ways. The one drawback is that they don't release orchestrations for those versions. So it's basically either using the tracks that you have to buy, or just the piano score. And I have some students who for the past few years have really enjoyed playing in the pit, and I want to have them play in the pit with me. I think it's a valuable tool. As someone who, as I said, started playing in pits from the age of 10, it's something that I firsthand, acknowledge the importance and, benefit of. It started, we were doing a production of 13. And I'm like, oh, it would be great to have the kids play, because that's how it was on Broadway. They had a kid, they had student, or, they had kids play the pit. Let's have, kids do our pit. And it continued. And now it's like, either I have to probably illegally create, my own orchestrations for these students to play, or, not to mention the sensitivity that comes, that's valuable as a performer to play with live musicians. They want to be able to breathe and have a moment. They want to have the audience response and then come into their next things with that sensitivity and freedom. So, I advocate for live musicians where I can. And, unfortunately, at least in that specific context of these junior shows, they've kind of, streamlined it out of the process, and that's a shame.
Well, okay. I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say much. So we're gonna come to my favorite part of the show. Stage left quickies. Don't panic. I'm gonna give you things you know. So quick reaction, just run it off. Okay, here we go. Pitch Perfect or Killer Instincts?
In terms of the songs? Or
the person singing, yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, Pitch Perfect or Killer Instincts?
I'm gonna go with the Instincts. So long as the notes are there.
Yeah. One song that always gives you chills.
Ooh. Story Goes On.
Okay. Dream show to music direct.
As of late, I've really wanted to do Bridges of Madison County or Bright Star. There's something about the folk sensibilities of the. Sorry, these are supposed to be quick.
Favorite instrument to copy for?
Oh, I mean, it's not really. Next question.
Least favorite instrument to format?
Woodwind parts or brass, all the mutes and instrument changes.
Last minute change, thrilling or terrifying?
Yes.
Dan Pardo, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. It was so fun. I learned so much. I'm gonna have to go back and watch this video and take some notes. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, of course,
I
Yvette.
appreciate it so much.
Best of luck with the podcast. I'll see you at our
Thank
next
you.
shift together.
Thank you. Thank you. See you next time. All
See you next
right.
time.